Hi guys, welcome back to My Steps to Sobriety, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. You know that this is not a typical, straightforward show. I always have very, very beautiful guests from all walks of life and from all areas of the world, and it is beautiful because we all go through trauma and we all go through so much crap in our life. Oh my goodness. So it is, therefore there are so many stories out there to be told, but some of these stories are special, and tonight is indeed a very special time for me because I've got the honor of having Rena Quint with me. Rena is a woman, is a very special woman, because she is a woman who was moving towards the light at a time when darkness was so profound that many people can't even imagine that. So I've got today a guest who is a woman who truly has, who is the daughter of many mothers. And that is a beautiful thing to say, and I'll let Rena tell us more about this title, The Daughter of Many Mothers. Rena, welcome to my show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've never been on a show quite like this. The title of my book is The Daughter of Many Mothers. And the reason, not that many people can say that they've had 6 mothers, but I was born, and I found my birth certificate, so I can really say I was born after many, many years of not knowing my birthday. I was born in Poland to a wonderful mother, I imagine, but I only had her for a few years. And then she and my brothers were taken off to Treblinka, and we were brought into the synagogue, and then people were taken out. Somehow or other, I managed to escape, which I will tell you later. And a man took me back to my father, and my father was working in a man's camp, so I became a man. But then he was taken away. So another woman who was a school teacher became my new mother. When she somehow disappeared, because all these people disappeared, either because she was shot or because she fell down dead or because she was, I don't know what, but she disappeared, somebody else. And then I was taken to a different camp, finally wound up in Bergen Belsen, which is a terrible concentration camp in Germany. I met somebody else. She again, everybody kept on disappearing. After the war, I wound up in Sweden, where a woman who had a son and daughter, her brother had gone to the United States, and he sent her tickets to come, for the 3 of them to come to the United States. Somebody had to sponsor you, and she got all the proper papers, and her daughter died. When her daughter died, it was my luck, and she asked me if I wanted to go with her to the United States. I was going to go to Palestine, which thank God now is Israel, with all the other orphans. And I was told my mother and father were there. I did not know that they were dead at that point. I got her daughter's name, her birthday, her mother, the place she was born. I became that child, and I had a new mother. And we came to the United States, and everything was very, very good for a while. But then she died. She had been so badly treated in the camps, and a lot of people died after the war. And then I was adopted by an American family, and they were my family for many, many years, and they gave me a wonderful life. In between, I may have had other people, but I believe that each one of these people who saved me was like an angel sent by God, because each one disappeared, but I could not have been saved without them.
What a story. And if some of you are confused, because if you don't know your history as well as Rena and I do, we are talking about 1935, or was it 1936? What is your real birthday?
Don't know.
You don't know.
My real birthday, I found out, was 35.
35.
But the birthday I go by was 36.
Oh, there you go.
So you can choose. You can choose.
Okay. Well, that was that beautiful day when you came to this earth. That was just 3 years before my ancestors invaded Poland and started the most brutal destruction of a country and with the view of 2 years later invading further east into Russia and creating a nightmare for the world. I mean, something that I still cannot fathom, how a civilized country, a country that was deemed high up in the recognition.
Cultured, civilized, educated, beautiful.
Correct. And that's what you write in your book. And that's so amazing because you say all that, yet here we were, my ancestors were going into your country and killing every Jew they could possibly get their hands on. Yeah,
Poland.
absolutely, in Poland. And it was very clear. And not regrettably, the fact is that there was a non-aggression pact just between Russia and Germany just the month before they invaded, and they had divvied up Poland. So the Germans came from the west, the Russians from the east, and everyone did exactly the same thing. They completely annihilated Poland, and
the central government. It was on the one side, one third went to Russia, one third went to Germany, and the central government stayed in Poland.
Right.
And that was where we lived.
So at that time, can you remember anything from that time? Because you would have just been very, very young. This would have been
I was about 3.5 years old.
That's right. So, and there were very few memories in that time. And wasn't
very
it?
few, but I put many of them together. There's certain things that I do remember. I remember being with my mother and brothers outside, and all of a sudden bombs started falling. People knew that a war was coming. I didn't, but people knew that a war was coming. And when the bombs started, and then the Germans came in with their boots and their uniforms and their motorcycles, and people started running away. Some people who had money ran to Russia. Some people went to other towns. My mother took my brothers and me down to the cellar, which was waiting for us. They had put potatoes and other food there just in case there would be something like that. And once the war started, the Polish army was not ready for the German occupation, and war started in full. And then the Piotrkow, the city I came from, became the first ghetto. And they walled in with barbed wire a certain area of the city, and that became the ghetto. And that's where all the Jews had to live. If anybody lived outside of that section, they had to move in. And any Christian who lived in that section moved out, but of course they had so many apartments to choose from, whereas the people in the ghetto had to find a place to live. So sometimes an apartment, even my apartment, which was really very nice, I've been back there, had 4 and 5 and 6 families moving in, and there wasn't enough food. People were dying of starvation. There wasn't enough heat. And Poland is a very cold country, and this was in December that the war, when the war first started. And people were dying of illnesses. There was no medicine, there was no heat, there was no food, there were no doctors, and there was just a lot of death and poverty, misery.
And we did that on purpose. This is not by accident. This was not an oversight of the German army that they suddenly conquered the country and actually thought, oh, damn, we don't have the supply lines to
No,
now
after that
feed.
They conquered France, they conquered Czechoslovakia, they conquered all of Europe.
Absolutely. And we didn't see that happening there, or to a much lesser degree, let's put it like that. So yes, you're right. And this is a shame that will forever lie on my country. And there's no two ways around that. But what I find amazing is the tenacity with which you hung onto life. It is there was a will in you that sort of floats through that book, where you really feel, no, you were born survivor. Sounds so cliche, sounds so stupid, but somehow you managed to survive.
I think it's very nice of you to say that, but I'm not sure that I managed. I think people helped me manage.
Right.
And I believe that God helped me manage. As a
Beautiful.
child of 3.5 and 6, I don't know that I had enough.
Okay, no,
I
I
had,
hear you. I hear you. And that's how you describe the angels in your life, isn't it? This
yes.
is this where women who saw that you suddenly were alone just
Yeah.
took you in their arms. And
I
it
could
is
not have survived without them.
That's right. And it was beautiful how he explained it in the book, because there was obviously this relationship building between you, who needed the help, but also the woman who now could focus on keeping this child safe, and therefore giving like a symbiotic relationship where the two of us, two of you, were supporting each other to a degree.
But isn't it terrible that I really don't remember them so well?
Ah,
I don't remember my biological mother or the others.
oh no.
There were so many things going on in such a short time that I was with each one of them until the last one that
Yeah.
I don't remember them.
Rena, please, how can you remember you were starved? Your nutrition would have been absolutely atrocious. Your little mind, your little brain would have not had all the chances that it needs, like a child hopefully nowadays has, to actually build these memories. You were somehow surviving. And this question goes through your book so many times. Who am I? Why can't I remember these things? And I felt your pain reading your book. But it is, I wanted to, when I read the book, I wanted to shout to Israel, no, no, don't feel guilty, because how could you have possibly laid down the memories in such a time? But I mean, it is somehow you went through these camps. You were lucky, as you describe it. You had the right angels looking after you. It is how long have you been in concentration camps? What was
Well,
the
the war
time frame?
started in 1939
Correct.
and it finished April 15th, 1945.
Yeah.
So I guess that's 6 years.
Blimey. Okay. And that alone is amazing, because the vast majority of stories don't end like that. There was so much death and so much suffering.
A
And
million and a half Jewish children were killed for no other reason that they were Jewish children.
exactly,
Many of them infants who never had a chance to do anything wrong.
exactly. You had the chance to somehow go to Sweden. You left after your last concentration camp was liberated. You write in your book that people said, "We are free, we are free." You remember that female voice shouting, "We are free," and you said, "I was too sick. I couldn't move, but I had no idea what free meant." And
Right. The British came in and I had typhus. Almost everybody had typhus. It's a very contagious disease. And the British came in and they told us that we were free and that they brought us food and medicine. We could do whatever we want to do. Well, what do I want to do? First of all, I didn't understand English. Second of all, I couldn't get up. When you have typhus, you can't get up, you can't see. And they're all with dead bodies lying all around. And the British had a very hard time. The first thing they had to do was bury 10,000 unburied bodies that they found. Then they tried to feed people, and 14,000 people died after the war. 2,000, according to the British, because they gave them the wrong food. If you haven't eaten for such a long time, you can't accept a chocolate bar or a sandwich that they gave you. And then they burned down all the barracks, the wooden barracks that were so infested with lice and fleas and feces. I mean, there were no toilets and people just soiled themselves everywhere. So I did not know what free meant at all. You're absolutely right.
And you were born 35, so we're now 45. So you're a 10-year-old young girl who is basically at death's door. and
Yes.
who, when we say surviving, I mean, you were really at a very limit there, but
Well, you know,
somehow,
excuse me, I did not know how sick I was, but when I got to Sweden, I was put into a Swedish hospital where I was supposed to be, not supposed to be, but a Swedish Christian couple wanted to adopt me. And the people around me said that I was Jewish and I belonged in Palestine. But the person who wrote the book with me, Barbara Sofer, wrote to the hospital in Hasselholm in Sweden, and they send me records. Can you believe it? I have a chart of my temperature, and I had typhus and diphtheria. Those are two sicknesses that aren't around very much, certainly not in our kind of countries.
Yeah.
And these are sicknesses that people would have died anywheres. And somehow or other, God meant for me to survive.
and that is where you learned how to ice skate.
I did.
Because then again, here you are a child that is now being nourished, that is giving attention, and that is learning how to skate on the ice, something that you could do in Sweden quite easily there. And
Yes.
I see that again as one of these things where finally you played catch up. You really went to finally live that youth that you missed. That was such a beautiful scene in your book.
Doing research, I was told that in Piotrkow in Poland, children started skating when they were 3.5, because there also it was. Now, I don't remember this, but when I was skating in Sweden and when I came to the United States and when I was married and I had children, I used to take my children skating, and I was a better skater than they were on the ring at the beginning.
Oh, no, it's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. How long were you in Sweden? How long was your recovery, actually? That's quite some time, wasn't it?
Maybe a year. You know, I don't know exactly. I could count it. I think I left in March of 46. The war ended in 45, so about close to a year. Sweden was very good to us. We came in there, and I was in a DP camp, which they displaced persons camp, which I called an alien camp, and they fed us all kinds of puddings to get us back to health. And to many people were really skeletons, and they gave us medicines and hope. And unfortunately, Sweden is very anti-Semitic now, or very anti-Israel now. But at that time, they were wonderful. They had not been fighting with the Germans, so they were neutral, and they were able to take in 6,000 citizens of Nazi German concentration camps, and I was one of them.
Did you, when you then moved with your new family to the United States, did you experience anti-Semitism when you arrived there?
No, I did not. The people were absolutely wonderful to me. We were called the Greeners, which is green, you know, like new, not experienced.
Oh, I see. You're
And
right.
the children started teaching me English, you know, say book, say dog, say cat, say hello.
Yeah.
Every day I learned a different word. And there was a man who had a store on Main Street. He sold carriages, and he found a doll carriage, and somebody gave me a doll. And at the age of almost 10, I started playing with the doll. I don't remember having a doll before. I probably did, but I don't remember. So I did not experience anti-Semitism at that time. However, several months later, when I was adopted by my American family, and I went to school, and I did not know how to speak English well, and I certainly did not know the letters. I didn't know how to read. I didn't know math, and I was put into a third grade because I was too old to be put into the first grade. And by this time, I was already healthy. There was a Miss Dutney who was not very nice to me. She gave a spelling test, and I was looking around to see what everybody was doing. And she decided I was copying. Of course, she took me to the principal, and the principal realized that I was too dumb to copy. You can't copy somebody's spelling test if you don't know the letters. And he took me out and put me into the next grade. The next teacher didn't know what to do with me. So my adopted parents, who had trial and error, but they were very, very good about it. They took me out of the public school and put me into a private small school and got me tutors. And after a while, I learned the letters and I learned to do many other things that children did. And I became a child again.
Beautiful, beautiful. There was at least finally some protection there. Although it is, the reason I'm asking is that America was actually very anti-Semitic in the Second World War. On purpose, they reduced the quotas for Jewish people to emigrate. They were at some stage 25,000 a year. They reduced it by 15,000. So on purpose, despite knowing what was happening in Europe. So therefore, it is interesting to see nowadays Hollywood's description of all this beautiful heroism of soldiers, etc. When the reality was probably a little bit different on the streets and behind the white picket fence. And the same applies.
Yes.
The same applies for the UK. The same applies for many other countries where latent anti-Semitism has been ripe for decades and centuries.
You're right, but in 1946, a movie came out. I just saw it recently. I belong to a film club called Gentleman's Agreement. And there a man, Gregory Peck was the actor, decided to write about anti-Semitism. And he's, what are you going to write about? It's been written about so many, many times. And he got this idea that he would become a Jew. And he had a little boy. His wife had died, and he told his little boy, now we're going to say we're Jews, and no one is going to know a secret. And he found out how difficult it was for Jews. For instance, he went to a hotel, and his name was Green, Bob Green, and they said, welcome, and they have a room. And then when he signed in, he signed Phil Greenfield. And they said, oh, that was a Jewish name. Oh, we're sorry, but there are no rooms left at all. And he said, but you just told me that there were rooms there. And he said, well, we made a mistake. There are no rooms at all. He was trying to argue with them, and the bellhop came and took his suitcase and brought it outside. And there were people in the lobby there. Nobody noticed what they were doing. As soon as he became a Jew, and many of the other incidents in that movie was very well received, and it showed the latent anti-Semitism that you said. I personally, as a child, did not feel it.
I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased to hear that, because it's hard enough. You have suffered through a darkness in your very early years that luckily you cannot recall too much of it. There are these flashes of memories that you describe. But ultimately, you were. It was a blessing and a curse, because obviously you want to remember the face of your mum. You want to remember those people that were close to you. At the same token, to actually remember every single thing that you truly experienced in those 6 years in the concentration camp. I mean, this is your mind helping you to not see that. Wow. But then you became a teenager. You became an American teenager, and everything included with that. Tell us a bit about that time, because you wanted to move on, weren't you?
Oh, absolutely. And try to make up for all the time that I didn't have. I came into this new school, and it was a small school. And I remember the first time seeing somebody climbing the monkey bars, and I didn't know how to do that. But I said, I'm going to pretend to do it, and I'm not going to think about death or falling. I'm just going to do it. And I did. And then when I got into high school, I went to a public high school, and instead of being the stupidest, the dumbest kid in class, I made up for it. And my parents helped me a great deal. And I started playing the piano and the cello, and I was in the band, and I went to football games, and we never, ever talked about the Holocaust. I was also very much ashamed to tell anybody that I was adopted, because the only children that were adopted at that time were children who were taken away from their mothers because they were drunk, or because they had done something else. Otherwise, mothers wouldn't give away their children for adoption or be taken away. I didn't want anybody to know that I was adopted. I didn't want anybody to know that I was different. I didn't want anybody to know that I was an only child. I never told anybody that I had two brothers and a different mother and father. And I just was able to get away with all of it. And I just never talked about it. I couldn't.
Did you have at that time a rebellious streak? Or did you actually have, was there a role for religion in your life at that state in time?
I don't remember being rebellious. I became very independent. Maybe that's a better word for it. But religion, I was adopted by a family who were conservative Jews. Then later on, I married a man who was more Orthodox, so I became more. But conservative Jews, they were very, very involved with Israel. And at first, it was only Palestine. Israel wasn't born in 1948. And we often think of Israel had been established 3 years earlier, 10 years earlier, in 1938 instead of 1948. And after the war, there was no place for Jews to go. And Jews in 45, 46, 47, until 48, when they did try to go to Palestine before Israel, they were taken to Cyprus and to Atlit and to camps. They weren't concentration camps, but they still were not free. I was in the United States. I could go, as you said, skating, even roller skating became something, and riding a bicycle and traveling and having parties. I loved having parties. And I really felt that I wanted to live life to its fullest. And thank God I had the opportunity to do that. My parents were very easygoing with me. They even let me go on a trip when I was 18, on a bicycle trip through Europe. On a bicycle trip where I cycled through 10 countries through Europe. And looking back at it, at that time, I guess it wasn't dangerous for a young woman to go on her own. I don't think that I would let my children do that now.
Times have changed, that is true.
Yeah.
But then at the same token, you said when you were 18, did I get the time right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So 35, that is 35, 45, 55, 53. This is only just 8 years after the formal end of the Second World War. For those of you out there who are still in the dream world that suddenly the 8th of May happened, everyone put their rifles down and now said, yes, now we're going to start a new life. I'm sorry to disappoint you. The Second World War didn't stop at the 8th of May. The Second World War continued in many countries, pretty much into the end of the 40s, even the start of the 50s, because civil wars at that time ripped communities apart. There's a beautiful book called The Savage Continent, which highlights the aftermath of the Second World War in Greece, in every country of Europe, and everywhere there was a civil war, wherever you looked, and these were brutal times. So you were just at the end of that period of civil unrest. At the same token, there was now this period of rejuvenation, of regeneration, of people wanting to move forward and rebuilding their countries. So it would have been a very vibrant and a very thirsty society or societies through which you traveled. How were you embraced there? What was your feeling when you went through these countries?
I think my life probably was different as a child and someone who was just brought into an American. I didn't have any friends who were Holocaust survivors. Yeah. However, there were communities where Holocaust survivors tended to stick together. I didn't. My parents were not Holocaust survivors, and I came into their crowd. But many people found it very difficult to find jobs First of all, they had to go to night school to learn English. They didn't know English. And then many people would not hire them. And then people who were religious were told, you either come into work on Saturday or don't bother coming to work on Monday. And there were many people who gave up religion and others who stayed with it and just went from job to job until they found themselves. But many years later, if you think about the year now, 2021, the head of Pfizer was a son of a Holocaust survivors from Greece. And there were many, many Holocaust survivors who were very, very successful. And we know of many of them. And they built up beautiful businesses, beautiful homes, did a lot of contributing to so many different causes. And living in Israel, you feel it. So I was different. I was different because I was a child. I was different because I lived in an American community. I was different because my parents had money and had a house, whereas refugees who came from Europe had absolutely nothing. And they didn't have families. And they tried to make their neighbors, the other people who came in on ships to the United States, people who came to Israel after 48, the government gave them a room, which was their apartment, and they shared it. And they also had to start from nothing. And it was a very poor country, and it was a very small country. Thank God Israel has now become high-tech in the world, and they have come from ashes, really, to being somebody.
And how beautiful is that? Oh, so here you were, I mean, you came back from your trip, and when did you meet your husband?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. I was married for almost 60 years to the most wonderful person. And he was a lawyer, and he was a rabbi. And there's a holiday called Sukkot, where the Jews remember being in the desert after leaving Egypt, and they made booths. And Jewish people celebrate that holiday. It's called Sukkot. And they build these little booths, which are temporary homes for 8 days. And I was already 20, 21, 22. And many of us just went from one sukkah, one booth to the other, taking a drink and taking some cake and meeting other people. And in one of those places, I met my husband. And he was a shy, not very outgoing man. And I was just the other way. I was very outgoing, and I loved people, and I just thrived being around crowds. And I don't even remember meeting him there, but he asked our host for my number. And our host said, well, she's very independent, and I don't know if, the two of you. So anyway, he got my number. He called me, and I went out with him, and he was not quiet, and he was not all the things that three of my friends said, Rena, he's not for you. He's too religious. He's too much of a bookworm, and he's not going to go dancing and as you say, skating and bicycling and things like that with you. Well, they were wrong. They were wrong. I went to his side of life. He went to my kind of life, and we really had a wonderful life. So that was a wonderful meeting on Sukkot in 1958.
How beautiful.
58 is how many years after the war? 45, 55?
Yeah.
Not many, 55.
13 years, yeah. But it's beautiful because in your book here, actually, you go over the many prejudices and perceptions that people have about Holocaust survivors, and that is what your book is so outstanding, and what I found so great reading it. It is literally, for me, it was a page turner, because you spontaneously answered so many questions that I had, and that I had on, maybe address some misconceptions that I had by your own experiences, and then by telling about the studies. You could say, oh, all Holocaust survivors, they must be very dire and very, very sad. And you said, well, actually, no. We have seen the sadness. We want the light. We want to live. We want to be out there. And your book goes through these kind of things. Are Holocaust survivors more frugal? Are they more religious? Are they, it is, give us some examples where you really, I mean, did you get surprises when you actually researched it yourself?
I'm very surprised to hear you because I haven't had people, speak about this or make these kinds of moves. So I really don't know how other people react to my book that way. They think about different things that you've mentioned. But I once had a group here, and they came to learn about Israel, and I was the token Israeli. We don't have a typical Israel home. We have a beautiful apartment with furniture that we brought from the United States,
Yeah.
and our home was all green, emerald green, and I had green carpeting and a green couch and green and white chairs and a lot of pictures around. And I was talking to this group and never telling them I was a Holocaust survivor, talking about Israel. And at the end, this was what we had planned on, but the government agencies who sent these people to us. At the end, I said, what do you think a Holocaust survivor's home would look like? And they said exactly the opposite of yours. It would be gray and dark and no pictures and very sad. And yours is full of life and lots of pictures. And you can see that there's a piano and there's a cello and there's a television and all that. And I said, well, I'm a Holocaust survivor. It was very hard for them to believe it because I mean, even my English is American English because I never spoke any language well. As far as being frugal, I don't think that you can put Holocaust survivors into one compartment. I think there are people who are frugal and need to be frugal because they have money, and the others who became very, very wealthy. And the same thing with being religious. There are people who stay religious, and there are people who completely lost their faith in God. I have two friends who were with me in Bergen Belsen and in Sweden, and they're now living in Israel. One of them is in Haifa, and when I visited her, she does not believe in God at all, whereas I believe very strongly. She has never gone to a synagogue, and she had made a pact with God that if he would find her father, she would believe in him. And if he would not find her father, she didn't want to have anything to do with him. And she never found her father. The other woman is even more of a problem to me. Her name is Helena, and she's in a beautiful old age home. She's been there for a long time, never married. And she says, how could you possibly want to bring in children in such a terrible world? Whereas I feel just the opposite. I want to bring in as many to replenish. I don't think I do it for that reason. And I don't know that I have a choice, but I have 4 children. And when I wrote the book, I had 22 grandchildren. That's still the same. But at that time, I had 22 great-grandchildren. And as of this week, I have 36 great-grandchildren with 3 more on the way. So I am very different from her. And I think you can save survivors. You can't put them into one up. They're all different.
How beautiful is that? And that is such an important thing. Let's actually demystify the kind of funny thoughts, funny beliefs out there of people when they think about Holocaust, when they think about it.
Are there any Holocaust survivors in New Zealand?
I do not know. I do
But
honestly
Australia
don't know.
has many. Australia has many.
Right. I have not been honored to meet any yet. That hopefully will change. But with all due respect, the Holocaust finished 1945, and it is since then a long time. So regrettably, life has to stop for most of us, actually for all of us, for that matter. And there are probably not so many people left. And therefore it is so...
Anti-Semitism is terrible now. It's rampant.
Yeah.
And when you think Australia, which is near you, there's so many incidents there. I was invited to speak in South Africa.
Yeah.
And then they put up a new museum. But they're experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism, as well as the United States and all of Europe, including Sweden, which have been so good to us.
May I ask, why do you think that is?
I really don't know the answer. I think a lot of it is just ignorance and just not knowing the facts.
Yeah.
I was once in Europe with my husband. We did a lot of traveling, and we went to St. Peter's in Church in the Vatican. And there's a statue of Moses that Michelangelo made, and it has horns. And the people you go to see this Michelangelo. It's a beautiful Pietà. He has the Pietà there, and he has all this. Michelangelo is one of the greatest artists around. And they looked at the men here. I was in Europe, and when I went on my bicycle trip. Most of the people were not Jewish. And they asked me, could they feel my head, because they wanted to know about the horns the Jews had. And there are no horns, but they did not know that. But Michelangelo made a sculpture with horns. Well, the reason he did is because the word karnaim, which is horns, is also rays of light. So in the Bible, it said there were rays of light going down on Moses, and it was translated as horns. So people thought the Jews have horns. People thought Jews smelled like Satan. And if you go into Yad Vashem, where I used to guide and now I speak, there's all these different things showing you. Hitler in 1933, before the war, way before, he would look at the eye color or the size of the nose. And he had all these different things talking about anti-Semitism, and those were the caricatures that were spread. And I think that besides the Holocaust, that is so important to show normal people or people similar to yours that you can't tell that one looks different. So there are many different misconceptions.
Oh, so true. And for those of you who get infused and want to know more, Yad Vashem has got the most beautiful online course on anti-Semitism. I can highly recommend it, which goes through the history of anti-Semitism from the many centuries ago with the pogroms to the Holocaust, and to nowadays, to the issues, to actually a very good segment on the difference between anti-Semitism and disagreeing with the conduct of the State of Israel. These are two very distinct differences there. So if you wanted to learn more about anti-Semitism, this is the place to go. Yad Vashem is absolutely beautiful, and this course is online. Please do it. This is it has been an eye-opener for me in the past. And Yad Vashem also did this year a virtual tour, which I took part in. So it is, again, if you get the chance to do that, please, guys, go out there and immerse yourself in this beautiful culture, which is one rich, gorgeous culture that is out there and needs to be out there. It's just as right or as wrong as an American culture or a French culture or whatever. I don't care, for crying out loud. Guess what? We all want to sing, we all want to dance, we want to feel love, we want to feel happiness, we hate pain. That's all of us, for crying out loud. So, no, honestly.
Anti-Semitism it's a real sickness. It's a real plague. And if you come here, you can see. When I went to South Africa, I was on a very anti-Semitic radio program, and I was told it would be. And they would ask me about Israel being an apartheid state, and I had to think very quickly, when people attack you with these different things. But if you go into our Knesset, our parliament, we have Arab members of the Knesset, even in the coalition now. And if you go into the Supreme Court, into the other courts, there are Arab, Muslim lawyers, and there are Muslim good doctors. And you just have to look and see if you want to. And if you go into the stores, there's a beautiful Mamila Mall that many Arabs from all over come, and they're allowed to come, and they're welcome to come because they bring a lot of money, and the storekeepers are very happy to have them. But people who come here don't know this. and everybody should be invited to come and to see for themselves that we are trying very hard to be open and welcoming. And you know what? There's no reason for war. There's enough water, there's no food, there's enough land, there's enough of everything if we could just find peace with each other.
So true. I could not say it, please. And that from a woman like you who has lived through so many changes in your life and in so many settings. What fascinates me is that you had very few memories from your younger years. You then lived this full and rich life in the United States. You founded your own family. You lived a happy life. But at some stage, you started to ask questions. And I think that is something that many people I've got on my show equally find. They find the intergenerational trauma. They have to come to terms with which was happened in the past. What did start your journey?
Well, you're so right. I ask myself very often, how did I survive? And why did I survive? And not my mother and my father and my brothers and 6 million other Jews who were killed, and millions of other people besides Jews who were killed in World War II. And I really don't know many of the answers. All I know, and I don't believe myself, except now I have proof. In 1989, I went back to Poland and I found my birth certificate. And I was so excited because I found my birth certificate. And I found my brother's marriage license. So now I knew I had a mother and a father, and they were married, and they were married by a famous rabbi. And I found my house. And the Polish woman living there remembered my father. And I found the factory that I worked in pretending to be a boy. So all these things that I wasn't sure that I remembered, I thought I did. And I thought I remembered my first name. And I thought I remembered my brother's. I found out that my memory was still okay. And I have proof of all, including, as I told you, that I was in the hospital. I certainly wouldn't know a temperature charge or what sicknesses I had, but the Israeli doctors translated the whole document for me. So I asked many of these questions, and I don't know why I was saved and not all the others.
My question, though, is why did you start searching? What made you change?
In 1981, there was a gathering of Holocaust survivors in Israel. And my children, I had 4 children at that time. The oldest was 20, 21, and 18, 16, 13. My son was going to be having a bar mitzvah. They said, you know what? You're like an ostrich. You put your head in the sand and you make believe nothing happened. Why don't we go? Maybe we'll find some other person in your family that survived, because I didn't know if anybody survived. And, my husband and I agreed, and we went. And I started looking. We put up little pieces of paper looking for anybody know somebody. Freida Lichtenstein was my name. Then I had 6 different names. I was a boy, I was a girl, I had 6 mothers. It's amazing that I know who I am. But we put up little signs looking for people from Piotrkow, and if anybody knew my family. Nobody knew my family, and I didn't recognize any of those people. So I wrote to a place called Arlson, which is an international tracing bureau. Now you can get a lot of that information online, or at Yad Vashem, or in the Washington Museum, or in the Simon Wiesenthal Center in California. But at that time, in 1981, there was this Arlson, and I wrote to them. And they wrote back to me, yes, my name was Freida Lichtenstein. Yes, my mother's name was Sarah Messer Lichtenstein, and my father's name. And I had the 2 brothers. And I was in the ghetto, and I was in different camps, and I was in Bergen Belsen. I was in Sweden, child adopted in America, case closed. So all the things that I doubted, now I had proof of. except that I never found the birth certificate, and I still used Fanny. That was the name of the girl who I had. In 1984, we made Aliyah. We moved to Israel with our family, and I started volunteering in Yad Vashem. And there, all of a sudden, more and more stories came out. And in 1989, Yad Vashem had a trip that I went to, and I actually found all the documents that I was looking for, which was pretty amazing. Can you imagine? In 89, they still had my birth certificate from December 35. But they found it, and the woman was very good about finding it, because she said, "Give me your American passport, and I'll look for it." I said, "My American passport, the name is different, the birthday is different, the mother's name is different, the country is different. What are you looking for? Nothing in the passport matches you." And my interpreter, the person I hired, because I don't speak Polish. I don't know if I ever spoke Polish. Yiddish was the language in the camps. And then I started speaking American English, and that's what my native language is now, English. So that's how I started looking. And then when I wrote my book, Barbara helped me remember many things. And then she took me to a psychologist. Because I said, I don't remember this and I don't remember that. And she took me in thinking that the psychologist could help me remember more. And after I spoke with the psychologist and told her, she says, "Rena, you remember enough. And what you don't remember, you don't have to. And you don't have to go into hypnosis or bring up things that your mind is trying not to remember, because you're trying to live a happy, normal life."
Which is so beautiful, such a beautiful insight. So this beautiful woman gave you actually the permission to put some of the search at rest. At the same token, the search was beautiful for you, because when they found your birth certificate, in your book you describe doing that spontaneous dance and being so, yes, see, I'm alive. Because
Exactly.
you had no proof. You had nothing apart from memories that at times you didn't even trust.
When I came back to the bus, which was filled with people working in Yad Vashem, and I showed them my birth certificate, they started applauding and crying. And they've gone through every, I mean, they've seen this and they've heard this, but to see one of their own people actually finding out that they were born, that they were alive, it just was very moving. It was quite a moment in my life.
Oh, beautiful.
Not many people can have that, because most people know they were born. I just didn't know.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then you came full circle. You were now working with Yad Vashem. You were going out there to actually speak, and that really started your journey of trying to touch as many souls out there and opening your story up so that others do not forget.
Yeah. Actually, most survivors did not want to speak about their experiences until after the Eichmann trial. After the Eichmann trial, when people came and they realized how important, and they said, "That happened to me, and that happened to this one, and that happened to that one," more and more stories. And then people realized, as you started off by saying that a lot of people say there's Holocaust denial, that it never happened. And then you had these people who were there saying, "I was there." And I even have a number. People in Auschwitz had numbers to prove it, but so many other people had memories and had sicknesses and that. One day I was giving a tour to Holocaust survivors, and when I said I was in Piotrkow and in the Hortensia glass factory, he said, "I remember a boy there, a little boy working as my job was to deliver water. In a glass factory, you need water for the glass. And I'm not sure I was the only boy there. I was maybe I was the only boy girl there. But when he said that, it also brought things back. And when you talk to people, they remind you of their stories. And then people just are willing to come out. People want to come out and talk about it. It's been hidden for a long time.
I didn't realize how important the Eichmann trial was. For those of you who are not aware, Adolf Eichmann was the architect of the Holocaust, really. A nasty piece of work who who was highly efficient, unfortunately, and who then went through the red lines to South America and lived in Argentina,
On a
until
pseudonym.
Indeed, until the Mossad basically sent a squad out to specifically capture him, get him out of Buenos Aires, and get him back for trial. And that was 1962. So just to put it all into perspective, what we're talking about. And that was probably the original Me Too movement,
Right.
where finally actually people were daring to speak up, because there must be such an a roller coaster of emotions in people who kept that hidden for such a long time.
One of the men, Kasetnik was his name, that was the number, he had his uniform. And when he took it out and he saw it, he actually fainted. It was such a moving kind of thing. And that trial is completely on film now. Certainly it's been postponed. He was the only person who was put to death in Israel. There was another man, Demyanuk, but they couldn't find absolute 100% proof, and he was let go. But he wasn't so welcomed in the United States also, but he died natural death in his 90s. The only one who was executed was Eichmann in our country.
That I was about to say, because in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, there were avengers, there were death squads, there were Jewish people who took the law into their own hands. And
not that many, I don't know, but the Nuremberg Trials tried the most upper echelon people.
But Rena, let's be quiet. The Nuremberg Trials were beautiful to actually document it and go after the big guys up there. But
how can you deny it?
Oh,
how can
absolutely.
you deny it? If the Nuremberg Trials don't deny it, and this happened so many years,
true.
You
That's very true. But the point that I want to make is that there were so many other Nazis who were very active in their persecution of the Jews, who then quietly either slipped away through the red lines, or i.e. through the Vatican, led paths that led to South America, or through Operation Paperclip, where many Nazis ended up in the United States or the UK or France, where basically were just taken in because they had knowledge. So it doesn't matter what you did in the Second World War or in the concentration camp, because you had the knowledge that we need. Therefore, you're a good boy now in the United States. All these kind of things. And that is something that is actually pissing me off, pissing me royally off, because here were men and women who have done atrocious things. Really, truly bad psychopaths, sociopaths, nut jobs. And when Israel wanted to find these people, suddenly everyone else out there said, no, we want to move on. So that bit of Holocaust, those 6 million Jews, who cares? So that was sort of from 1950 onwards, Israel had very little chance of getting persecutions done, was it not? This must have been such a frustrating thing. Did you follow that at that time?
I did, but I once had a group of Armenian people.
Yeah.
And the Armenian genocide has been forgotten. And you can't allow these things to be forgotten.
Correct.
But it wasn't just Germany.
Yeah.
There were collaborators in many of the other countries. And you started off by talking about Poland.
Absolutely.
And after the war, there was a city called Kielce. And when the Jews came back to Kielce, 26 of them were killed because they came back.
Correct.
And there's a book called Neighbors about showing how many Polish people were very much ready to kill Jews now. And the head of Yad Vashem in Poland, who happened to have come from my hometown, when he came, he was practically murdered, he and his friend, and they had to run away. And many people said, how'd you manage to get out of the camps? Why didn't they finish you off? Go back to the gas chambers. So there are, and there still are. But I think that when we talk about it, and it's it's something that I live with. You have to remember the bad, but you also have to remember the good.
Absolutely.
And as many people as there were who were terrible, 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 you can't even find enough words to say how atrocious. You get Dr. Mengele, who performed experiments on twins and on cancer patients and would put cancer into them and did terrible, terrible things. But there were righteous amongst the nations who tried to help people. So there's
tell us
one
about
or the other.
Yeah. Please tell us about the righteous of the nations.
Well, I did not know. I did not know them, but there were people who were in hiding. And I have been on panels with people who were in hiding, by Christians who were underground, let's say, for 3 years. And the man or woman, not even an educated person, just maybe a farmer, very simple people who felt that justice had to be done, or they couldn't see people just being killed, and they would bring down a little food or take out their wastes because there was no toilet there. And there were people who, there were convents and there were nunneries who took children in. Many of those children are still there who never found out that they were Jewish. Although the Israeli state, after Israel was became a state, they sent people trying to get Jewish children out of convents and nunneries and bring them to Israel. Some of those children didn't want to come because they didn't know anything else. And then there was England that took in 10,000 children for the kinder transport. They're there. So there were some good people. There were terrible, terrible, terrible people. So I think we have to remember both.
And that is what I love at Yad Vashem, because you have got at the entrance of Yad Vashem, you have got this little plantation there where the trees are planted for those 25,000 recognized righteous of the nations.
Right.
And this is such a
and
beautiful...
And there are carob trees that stay green all the time, and they show you life. And when you go through the museum, when you come in, it's dark, but there's one place to look out, and that is the righteous amongst the nations. And of course, we cannot forget the Eichmanns and the Goebbels and the Hitlers, but there are a lot of people coming up now. And you know what? The Jewish people in the United States did a great deal for the blacks, so they were called Negroes at that time. And now the black movement goes, and they don't remember that. And we have to try to show them that Jews at one point were very helpful to, and Martin Luther King adapted that. That's why I feel that we have to remember both sides.
Which is so beautiful. And that is the work that needs to keep going, because it is like us here sitting together, and God, hopefully one day we can sit together and enjoy literally us together and have a cup of coffee and some bread together.
You're very welcome. You're really very, very welcome.
I guess
I have a lot of cups and a lot of coffee.
You're a woman to my heart. I like that. The reality is that if we can all come together and find common ground, then it makes it so much more difficult for extremism to somehow raise its ugly head. If you can, but then again, who am I to say that? Because ultimately it was in many countries in the Second World War or in the lead up to it, it was the neighbors that have denounced the Jews. It was essentially, it was the people that you knew, that you called friends, that you called co-workers, etc., who were essentially then actually causing the harm, and in actual fact in many towns, literally started hunting and killing Jews. This was not necessarily the Germans all the time. On the contrary, it was the neighbors and friends, so-called. And you think, what the hell? But then you go to Yugoslavia, in the Yugoslavian Civil War in the 90s, 80s, 90s, you've had exactly the same thing. So it is... But then again, I don't want to think like that.
But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There are terrible people in this world, and there are good people in this world, and we have to try to, for the people who would like to have peace, to try to win over there. And listen, they're working on climate control. We have to work on anti-Semitism, and we have to work on many other. When the Ethiopians came here to Israel, I think the year was in the mid 80s. I had never seen people like that. Now I had seen dead bodies, and I got used to that, and I was able to look at it because it was part of my everyday life. But when the Ethiopians came without, they had no shoes. They were wearing from rubber tires things. They did not know how to use a toothbrush. They did not know how to use a toilet. Some of the people in there may have, but many of the people there, and you look at them now, 20 and 30 years later, and they're part of our civilization, including even members of Knesset. Our minister of tourism is a little girl who came over and became somebody in Israel. So there's hope for everybody. Beautiful. And that's what we have to do, is hope.
Well, indeed. And work together. And
work together.
Absolutely.
Work together.
No, we cannot allow anyone to forget the Holocaust. And may I ask, I use the word Holocaust naturally because that was what we used in Germany. What about Shoah? What is there, which word do you use?
It depending who I'm speaking to. Right. I think people in New Zealand know the word Holocaust more. Shoah is a Hebrew word, and it's certainly accepted, but I don't know if everybody knows it, but I think everybody knows the word Holocaust. When I went to South Africa, and I've mentioned that, and I'm an old lady, and they thought it would be easier for me to get through with a wheelchair, and my grandson was pushing me because my husband at that time had gotten sick, and the people, he was running along and somebody else was pushing me. And the people said, "Oh, did you come to see the safari?" And I said, "No, I came to talk about the Holocaust." And they said, "Who is he?" And they had no idea what I was talking about. And I said, "Did you ever hear of Hitler?" And they said, "Who is he?" Now you could say that these people were pushers in the airport and they're not so educated, but it's painful to hear that somebody never heard the word Holocaust or Hitler. And we have to get to speak to them. In Tennessee, you mentioned paper clips. There was a principal who tried to teach the children about the world, and they mentioned the word Holocaust. They said 6 million, and you can't imagine 6 million people. And she says, "We'll have an experiment with paper clips. Let's count paper clips." And somebody brought in a package of 100. It was teeny. And then other people brought in, and they had 1,000. And it was just very little. And then they had 1,000,000. And then they finally had to get a room to put the paper clips into. And then they got a cattle car from Germany to put all the paper clips in to see how many paper clips make up 6 million. How many people are 6 million? Wow. And it's very hard, but these children really changed in their thinking when they started talking about the paper clips, each representing a person.
Wow. Wow.
You can look that up on the web also, paper clips.
Yeah, paper clips. Although what I was referring to is Operation Paperclip, which was the code name to bring Nazis into the United States in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. So that is, but wow, I did not know that story. But imagine the impact to see that.
6 million.
Yeah. Wow.
How many are in your community? How many are in your town?
Oh, no, the whole country. The whole country has 5.2 million or so.
So think the whole country plus being annihilated.
Exactly. No,
that's a very good way of looking at it for New Zealand.
How, I want to ask you, if you could send a message back to your younger self after all this transformation, after all the journey that you have taken, and you could send some message back, what would you send back?
Well, that's a difficult one, but I think what I would like to do is to sort of say, live life to its fullest. Live life and enjoy as much as you can. Have a family, try to bring peace, travel as much as you can, have all the good things, do all the things, be kind to other people. Don't do it says in the Bible, don't do unto others that they wouldn't want you to do unto you. And if you think about that, but we have to love as much as we can, and we just have to be the people they never had a chance to be.
Indeed.
And all the things that they didn't do, we try to do to us and to people around us.
Yeah. So beautiful. And that is exactly what recovery is about after addiction. That is what recovery is about after mental health problems. And that is equally the quintessential message from a woman like you who has gone through such a lot in her life. So there must be something about it that actually we all should bloody well listen and actually do something about it, live our life to the fullest, which means to start looking after yourself. And maybe by you being this beautiful person, your light starts to shine and shines onto others, and others suddenly see, oh, this is actually a really great person, and I want to know more how she ticks in this case. And you know, all the work that you have done for Yad Vashem, and all the work that you hopefully will still keep doing, all the messages that you keep sharing. It's so beautiful, because if we can just keep all going, imagine we just the two of us hopefully have touched one soul today, and that soul maybe starts shining in their own little way and is shining the light to someone else who needs to see it, etc. Would that not be nice?
Absolutely. I enjoyed this interview, but of course we talked more about our thoughts and after the war and believing, but we really didn't talk about exactly what happened to people in the Holocaust, how they suffered and how they died and how they starved and how they were mangled and how they were treated worse than any animal in the world should have been treated. And I think you need to read some of the books, or you've got lots of it. Alfred Hitchcock, who was a well-known man in Hollywood, took pictures in Bergen Belsen. And in 1946, they refused to have him show it because they were such atrocities that people could not fathom it. But nowadays, all kinds of things are shown on television. And that should be shown. But it really is, if you see a documentary like that, you know, I had enough. And you feel like you're just going to throw up. You can't imagine that people could do that. And that's why we can't imagine that anti-Semitism and anti-people could go on, and now anti-racism. And that's what we have to try to erase and eradicate.
I'm so grateful for your words there. And hopefully we can bring this interview out to as many people out there as we can, because you said it so eloquently. I will never find the right words there as you did. Rena, you're an amazing woman. You're doing an amazing work. You survived for a reason, and you made the most out of your life. And I think that is the beautiful transformation, the beautiful story in that is going with you. And you guys out there, please buy Rena's book. It is absolutely amazing to read.
This is my book. It's called The Daughter of Many Mothers.
Yeah.
And it does have the whole story before, during, and after. And you think to buy it's on Amazon. Of course, it's in Yad Vashem and in my home. So if you come to Israel, it's I can personally inscribe it to you, and I'd like to. And I'd like other people to know the story, read the book, and pass it on so that other people will know it. There aren't enough people who know about the Holocaust or Shoah, as you say. And thank you for giving people that opportunity to find out more.
Absolutely. Rena, thank you so much for your time. I know I've spent so much of your time already, and your bottom must be going numb from just sitting there now. You honored me for allowing me this much of your time. Thank you so much. Let's make this world a little bit better. You guys out there, look after yourself.
Bye-bye.